Picture this. You drive 2 hours to your dead wife's favorite place on earth, the cabin her grandfather built with his bare hands, and find some stranger standing in your living room holding bolt cutters, smiling. That was my Friday. The lock my dad and I installed, sheared clean through, lying in the dirt like a murdered pet. Door hanging open. Inside, my furniture shoved around, Sarah's photos face down on the floor, and Brenda Kowalski, HOA president, actually Satan in a tennis visor, cataloging my violations. Your dues were 3 days late, she purred, waving her clipboard. Section 12.4 permits emergency access. Then 2 guys in tactical vests stepped out of my bedroom. Sidearms drawn, Brenda's spray-tanned face went from smug to snowman white in half a second. Freeze frame on that expression. I'll remember it forever. She didn't know I'd spent 3 months setting this trap. What would you do if an HOA Karen broke into your family sanctuary? Comment below and tell me, has your HOA ever committed actual crimes against you? Let me rewind 6 months so you understand how we got here. My name's Nate Harmon, 52 years old, semi-retired machinist, widowed 4 years back when cancer took Sarah way too young. This cabin, 40 acres of Douglas fir and creek bottom at 4,200 feet in the Washington Cascades, was her favorite place on earth. Her grandpa built it in 1967 from hand-split cedar he cut himself. Every beam, every joist. My dad expanded it in '89, added a workshop for furniture making. After Sarah died, that workshop became my church. Weekends I'd drive up from Tacoma, step out of my F-250 into air that tastes like metal and pine resin, hear the crunch of needles under my boots, and feel almost human again. My daughter Jessie, 28, civil engineer, gets her stubbornness from both sides. Brings my grandson Liam up once a month. The kid's 6. Last visit he caught his first trout with the same rod my grandpa taught me on, and I swear I saw Sarah smiling in the way the light hit the water. This place isn't real estate, it's 3 generations of life. Then Brenda Kowalski bought the cabin 2 lots over. 18 months ago she rolled in fresh off selling tech startup shares in Bellevue. Platinum bob haircut that probably cost more than my mortgage, tennis visors worn indoors like some kind of power move, white Lexus RX with vanity plate Rolls 4U. The smell of her perfume, imagine a Bath and Body Works having a panic attack, arrived 30 seconds before she did. 3 months later she's HOA president, running on a modernization platform. In practice, that meant she looked at cabins owned by logging families and saw opportunities. Her husband, Derek, runs a construction company that's hemorrhaging money. Everyone in town knows it, but nobody says it to his face. Brenda needs control the way a drowning person needs air. Probably because their finances are held together with duct tape and desperation. She'd decided rustic cabins like mine were dragging down property values. 6 months ago, I pull up on a Saturday and find a citation zip-tied to my door. Unapproved exterior paint, $250 per week until corrected. My hands actually shook reading it. The cabin's never been painted. It's natural cedar. Has been since Johnson was president. I drive to Brenda's place. She's got those Edison bulbs and a live laugh love sign big enough to violate airspace. And knock. She opens the door holding a wine glass the size of a goldfish bowl. The cedar's the original finish, I say, staying polite. My grandfather, she cuts me off. Section 8.2 requires approved materials. Cedar degrades, unsightly. I pull out the original deed, older than the HOA by 3 decades. The HOA wasn't formed until 1998. She squints at it like I'm handing her a ransom note written in crayon. Grandfather clause expired 2015. State statute. I ask which statute. I'll email the reference. She never did. Shocking, I know. I paid the first fine, $250 I didn't have lying around, while I researched. Turns out there's no expiration on pre-existing structures. She just lied. But by then she'd moved on. Noise complaints when I ran my table saw at 2 p.m. She claimed quiet hours were 9 to 9. Actual rules say 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Demanded I remove my dad's restored 78 Bronco. Called it a derelict vehicle. That truck's worth $12,000 and runs smoother than her marriage. Then she threatened a lien over my unkempt landscaping, the wildflower meadow Sarah planted before she got sick. Lupine, paintbrush, columbine. When the hummingbirds came through in July, it looked like stained glass moving in the wind. Brenda called it a fire hazard. My buddy Glenn, 62, fishing guide, voice like gravel in a blender, cornered me at the diner. Nate, she's run off 3 families this year, all creek front, all sold cheap. He leaned in. LLC called Cascade Retreats bought every one, flipping them to Airbnb. I felt something cold settle in my chest. You think? Glenn cut me off. I know. She doesn't want you to comply. She wants you gone. That's when I stopped playing defense. 2 weeks after Glenn's warning, I get a certified letter. Not regular mail, certified, signature required, like I'm being served divorce papers. Inside, notice of an emergency HOA meeting I was never invited to. They'd voted to require a $15,000 infrastructure assessment on all pre-1,990 cabins. $15,000. For cabins that had been standing fine for decades, while Brenda's crowd was still living in condos and complaining about parking spots. Here's the kicker. Only 4 properties in Pinecrest qualified as pre-1,990. Mine, Old Ed's Place, Carmen's Cabin, and one other. Convenient, right? And the engineering firm chosen to conduct these mandatory inspections, owned by Brenda's nephew, a kid who got his license maybe 3 years ago and whose previous experience was inspecting strip mall foundations in Spokane. The letter gave me 30 days to pay or they'd file a lien against my property. A lien. On land my family had owned since before these people knew what a mountain looked like. The violation report was a masterpiece of fiction. Foundation settling. Yeah, timber frame cabins settle. That's what they do. It's called physics. Non-GFCI outlets in the workshop. The workshop was built in 1989, before that code even existed. Inadequate septic system, which had passed county inspection every single year, including 2 months ago. I had the certificates. Didn't matter. Brenda's nephew had spoken, and apparently his word was law now. I called my buddy Rita. 68 years old, retired courthouse clerk who'd spent 4 decades watching lawyers trip over their own procedures while she quietly ran the whole operation from behind the counter. She had this way of smiling when she found mistakes in legal filings, like a cat that just spotted a mouse. She agreed to help for $200 flat. "Let me see what I can find," she said, and 2 days later she called me back laughing so hard she had to catch her breath. Turns out HOA bylaws require 14 days written notice for any special assessment. This meeting happened 6 days after the posted notice. Illegal. The whole vote was void. Here's your takeaway. Always check your HOA's governing documents against their actions. Most board members don't actually read their own rules, and one procedural violation can void everything they did. Rita helped me draft a certified letter back. Cure period invoked, threatened lawsuit for selective enforcement, cited the specific bylaw they'd violated. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I had some leverage. Then Brenda escalated. She scheduled a follow-up inspection for the exact day of my grandson's 6th birthday party. I know she stalked my social media because I'd posted about it. Liam's first big kid party, bouncy castle, the works. I wasn't going to miss it. So Glenn offered to house sit, and I did something else. I installed trail cameras around the property. 4 of them, motion activated, hidden in tree hollows and under eaves. All perfectly legal. My land, my cameras. Brenda showed up anyway, with a sheriff's deputy. Her brother-in-law, Deputy Krantz, who I'd seen at her holiday parties in his off hours downing bourbon like it was water. She claimed there'd been an anonymous tip about illegal firearms on the property. Illegal firearms, I don't even own a gun. Glenn met them at the door, stayed calm, told them they needed a warrant to enter. You could hear the blood rushing in his ears from the camera audio. Brenda started taking pictures through the window with her phone, snapping away like she was documenting a crime scene. But my cameras caught something better. After Glenn refused entry and they left, the footage showed Brenda's nephew returning 90 minutes later, alone. He walked around to the back of the cabin carrying a crowbar, started chipping away at the foundation mortar with it, deliberately creating the settling damage his own report had claimed to find. I watched the footage 3 times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. The metallic scrape of the crowbar on stone made my teeth hurt. I filed a police report the next morning, brought the SD card, showed the deputy, not Krantz, thank God. He took my statement, watched the video, then shook his head. "This is a civil matter, Mr. Harmon. You need to talk to a lawyer." Civil matter. The guy was on camera vandalizing my property, and it's a civil matter. But 2 days later, Brenda posted on the HOA Facebook page anyway. Screenshot of Glenn in my doorway looking annoyed. Caption: "Trespasser threatening compliance officer during lawful inspection. Owners who harbor dangerous individuals will be held accountable." The post got 47 likes from people I'd never met. Transplants who didn't care who got crushed as long as their property values went up. That's when I stopped trying to play fair. I posted the vandalism footage to a private Facebook group for cabin owners. 47 members, people who'd lived here for generations. Within 2 hours, 8 of them messaged me with their own Brenda stories. Carmen said Brenda had threatened to call CPS because her kids played too close to the creek. Old Ed said she'd forced him to cut down a 200-year-old oak tree by lying about a utility easement. We were starting to see the pattern. And patterns, in my experience, are how you find the breaking point. A week after I posted that vandalism footage, Brenda's husband Derek showed up at my machine shop in town. Middle of a Tuesday afternoon, I'm running a lathe job for a contractor, and this guy walks in wearing a polo shirt with his company logo embroidered on it. Derek Kowalski Construction. The business everyone knew was hemorrhaging money, but nobody mentioned because small-town politeness is a disease. "Nate, got a minute?" Friendly voice, but his eyes were cataloging everything. My equipment, my client's parts on the workbench, the stack of invoices by the register, looking for weak spots. I shut down the lathe, and the sudden silence felt heavy, like right before a thunderstorm breaks. "Sure, Derek. What can I do for you?" He leaned against my tool chest, too casual, trying to project confidence he clearly didn't have. "Look, things have gotten tense with the HOA situation. Brenda can be passionate about community standards, but I'm a reasonable guy, businessman to businessman." He pulled out his phone, showed me a number. "180 for your property. Cash deal. I handle all the HOA liens. You walk away clean. Everybody wins. $180,000. My cabin was worth at least $300K, probably $350 with the creek frontage." He was lowballing me by 40% and acting like he'd just offered me a kidney. I stared at him long enough that he shifted his weight. "That's generous, Derek, but I'm not selling." His smile stayed plastic, but his eyes went cold, like someone had flipped a switch behind them. "Hate to see things get more complicated for you. Code enforcement starts poking around business permits. You know how it gets. Real tangled, real fast when inspectors start asking questions." There it was. He wasn't just threatening my cabin anymore. He was threatening my livelihood, the shop that kept my bills paid and my mind occupied during the years after Sarah died. I kept my voice level. "My permits are current. Been inspected 6 times in 5 years, passed every time." He pushed off the tool chest, headed for the door, then turned back. "Offer's good for 2 weeks. After that, market changes. You know how it is." The smell of his cologne, something that probably cost more than his truck payment, lingered in the shop like a bad omen. I opened both bay doors to air it out. 7 days later, county inspector shows up. Guy named Malloy, never seen him before, but he had that look. Bored government employee who'd stopped caring about doing things right about 15 years ago. Starts flagging my fire extinguishers as overdue for recertification. I walked him to the extinguisher by the lathe. Yellow inspection sticker dated 2 months prior, bright as a highway sign. "Not our approved vendor," Malloy said without even squinting at it. His coffee breath could have stripped paint. "Need to re-inspect with county certified provider." I pulled out my phone, photographed the sticker, Malloy's face, his county ID badge. "I'll be filing a complaint with your supervisor. And I'm curious, you play poker with Derek Kowalski?" His expression didn't change, but his pen stopped moving for half a second. "Tells. You learn to read them when you've spent 30 years measuring tolerances in 10,000ths of an inch." "Don't know what you're talking about," he said, and walked out. That night I drove to the cabin and spent 4 hours installing cameras inside. Not just perimeter anymore, inside. Smoke detector in the living room where anyone entering would walk past it first. Bookshelf clock in the hallway pointing at the back door. Kitchen vent hood covering the one blind spot. All feeding to cloud storage they couldn't erase, even if they took a sledgehammer to every device. The night air smelled like Douglas fir and coming snow, sharp and clean. Usually that smell reset my nervous system. Not this time. Then I did something smarter. Filed a public records request with the county for all properties claiming HOA exemptions in Pinecrest. 3 weeks later, those documents arrived and I sat in my truck reading them, feeling something cold and sharp settle in my chest. Brenda's cabin had identical violations to mine. Non-GFCI outlets, foundation settling, the works. Marked exempt primary residence. Except her primary residence was in Bellevue. The tax assessor's database confirmed it. She was committing tax fraud to exempt herself from the same rules she was using to destroy me. Here's your knowledge nugget. HOA board members must follow the same rules as everyone else. It's called selective enforcement, and in Washington state it voids their actions and opens them to civil liability. If they cite you for violations their own property has, document it, request the records, and lawyer up. I made 3 copies of everything. 1 to Rita, 1 in my shop safe, 1 in a safety deposit box in Tacoma. But here's what really got me. I started pulling property records for every cabin that had sold under distress in the past 3 years. 11 properties. Every single one bought by Cascade Retreats Holdings, LLC. I didn't know who owned that LLC yet, but I was going to find out. Because Brenda wasn't just harassing me. She was running a scheme, and I was about to burn it down. 31 days after that illegal assessment letter, Brenda filed the lien. $15,000 plus $3,200 in administrative fees, $1,800 for legal review that probably took 20 minutes, $900 for postage that cost $8, $500 to store papers in a filing cabinet for 3 weeks. The arithmetic of corruption, itemized. Washington law allows HOA foreclosure after 90 days of non-payment. Brenda's strip mall lawyer sent the notice at 60 days like he couldn't wait to start the clock. I drove to Rita's house that Friday morning. She read it at her kitchen table, reading glasses perched on her nose, making that cat spotting a mouse smile she got when she found legal errors. Motion to nullify, she said. Illegal meeting, fraudulent assessment, selective enforcement. Judge Marlene Cho, 8 weeks for a hearing. 8 weeks while that lien sat on my property like a tumor, while Brenda told everyone I was a deadbeat, but I wasn't waiting. I'd learned HOAs in Washington file as nonprofits, which means tax returns. Form 990, public record. You request them through IRS Form 4506. A, takes 2 weeks, costs nothing. When mine arrived, I sat in my truck in Rita's driveway reading them, and the smell of old paper and toner ink mixing with my cold coffee made me nauseous for a different reason than usual. Previous president's management fee, $8,000 a year, reasonable. Brenda's, $64,000. I checked the decimal 4 times. Then I pulled up the budget posted on the HOA website. $40,000 was just missing. Gone. Into Brenda's pocket, I'd bet my toolbox on it. Here's your knowledge nugget. In 37 states, HOAs file as nonprofits. Request their tax returns with IRS Form 4506A. Look for inflated salaries or budget gaps. Financial fraud voids any liens they've filed, and it's not just civil, it's criminal. I highlighted the discrepancies in yellow so bright you could see it from orbit and sent copies to Rita. Then I shared it in the cabin owners Facebook group. Within 6 hours, 12 families announced they were stopping dues payments, a quarter of the community refusing to fund Brenda's empire. She posted a 17-paragraph meltdown about conspirators undermining governance. Her lawyer Vince sent cease and desist letters to everyone. Rita read one and actually laughed. He cited a statute that doesn't apply to private Facebook groups, first-year law student stuff. That same week, a reporter from Cascade Weekly called. Aisha Mwangi, sharp voice, sharper questions. Someone had tipped her off. Mr. Harmon, I'm investigating HOA governance in rural communities. I understand you've had difficulties? I gave her the overview. She asked for documentation. I had enough to wallpaper a house, but Brenda found out. Derek's buddy at the county clerk's office probably warned them when Aisha requested public records. Within 48 hours, Brenda launched a special compliance sweep. First target, Carmen's cabin. Carmen's a single mom, 39, works 2 jobs to keep the cabin her grandparents left her. Her kids, 7 and 9, spend summers catching frogs in the creek, building forts from fallen branches. Brenda cited an unpermitted deck extension. It was 4 pressure-treated boards on cinder blocks where the kids parked their bikes. The wood was already weathering gray, moss growing in the cracks. Didn't require a permit in any county in Washington. Didn't matter to Brenda. Then she filed a CPS report. Child Protective Services. Alleged unsafe living conditions. Bikes on the lawn creating tripping hazards. Carmen showed up at my shop crying so hard she could barely breathe. Mascara running down her face. She was already fighting her ex in custody court. Now CPS was coming because her kids left bikes outside like every 7-year-old in America. I can't fight her and my ex, Carmen said, her voice cracking. I'm going to lose my kids, Nate. I'm going to lose everything. The smell of her fierce sweat mixed with my shop's cutting oil made something snap in my chest. I remembered Sarah telling me once, dealing with a nightmare client, sometimes you can't just defend, sometimes you have to attack. I'd been defending for 6 months, documenting, filing motions, being reasonable while Brenda ignored every rule. I was done. Rita had the fraud evidence. Aisha had the story angle. I had cameras and public records. It was time to stop reacting and start hunting. That night I made a list. Brenda's vulnerabilities, her husband's connections, every person she'd threatened. Then I called Sheriff Roy Blanton. He'd been bringing his department's equipment to my shop for maintenance for 5 years. We weren't friends exactly, but we had the kind of relationship where you help each other out. Roy, I said, how would you feel about catching an HOA president committing breaking and entering? He was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, tell me more. Sheriff Roy met me at a diner in town 2 days later, far enough from Pinecrest that nobody would see us together. He ordered coffee black, no sugar, and listened while I laid out 6 months of harassment, fraud, and Brenda's pattern of running families off their land. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, stirring his coffee even though there was nothing in it to stir. "I've been watching this situation," he finally said. "Deputy Krantz is Brenda's brother-in-law. We've flagged him for selective patrol patterns, ignores calls from your area unless Brenda requests backup. I can't prove anything yet, but I don't like the smell of it." He looked up at me. "You said you have cameras?" I nodded. "Inside and out, cloud storage. If she enters without a warrant or my permission, that's criminal trespass. Burglary if she takes or damages anything." Roy smiled, and it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who'd been waiting for an excuse. "Keep me posted on your movements. If she makes a move, I want to know immediately." But the real bomb dropped 3 days later, and it came from Rita's paralegal intern. Kid named Deshaun, 26, third-year law student at UW, working for credit hours and resume material. He was the kind of guy who got excited about archived documents the way most people get excited about football. Rita called me at the shop, her voice vibrating with that specific frequency of someone who's just found buried treasure. "Nate, you need to sit down for this." I sat on my workbench, phone pressed to my ear. Deshaun pulled the original 1998 HOA charter from county microfiche, the actual founding documents. She paused for effect. "There's a paragraph in the original that explicitly exempts structures predating the HOA formation from all assessments and exterior modification requirements. No expiration, no sunset clause, permanent exemption." My chest felt tight. And someone whited it out on the official version filed with the county in 2019, Brenda's first year as president. The room tilted slightly. "That's not just fraud, Nate. That's document forgery. Class C felony in Washington. Carries up to 5 years. I drove straight to Rita's office. Deshaun had both versions printed side by side, the 1998 microfiche copy and the 2019 filed version. The whiteout was visible if you looked close, a faint texture difference in the paper grain where paragraph 3.7 used to be. Someone had literally taken whiteout to a legal document, made a new copy, and refiled it as authentic. It was so brazen it almost looped back around to stupid. "This doesn't just void your lien," Rita said, tapping the documents. "This voids every assessment, every citation, every lien filed against pre-1990 cabins since 2019. It's a criminal referral to the state attorney general." She looked at me over her glasses. "We can go 2 ways. Quiet settlement, you get your lien removed, walk away clean, or nuclear. We file criminal complaints, expose the whole scheme, and watch Brenda's world burn down. Your call." I thought about Carmen crying in my shop. Old Ed's 200-year-old oak tree, cut down based on lies. The 11 families who'd lost their cabins in distress sales, property bought by that mysterious LLC. How many families has she destroyed because they didn't know their rights? Rita nodded slowly. "That's what I thought you'd say." Deshaun grinned. "Want me to keep digging? Because I'm just getting started." "Dig," I said. "Find everything." 3 days later, my shop after hours looked like a war room. Nate, Rita, Jesse, Deshaun, Glenn, Carmen, Old Ed, 7 people crowded around my workbench with coffee and documents spread everywhere. The smell of brewing coffee mixed with machine oil and the particular electricity of people who'd finally had enough. Sheriff Roy leaned against the far wall in civilian clothes, arms crossed, listening. Deshaun had been busy. He'd pulled business registrations for Cascade Retreats Holdings, LLC. Managing member, Derek Kowalski, Brenda's husband. The same LLC that had bought 11 distressed properties in 3 years, every one of them foreclosed or panic sold after Brenda's HOA harassment. Average purchase price, 42% below assessed value. They were running a literal shakedown scheme, terrorize families until they sold cheap, flip the cabins to Airbnb tourists at market rate. The profit margin made my machinist's brain hurt. "This is called conflict of interest," Rita said, highlighting the relevant statute in Washington's HOA law. RCW 64.38.025, board members cannot personally profit from enforcement actions. Every lien they filed is void. Every foreclosure is potentially reversible. She looked around the table. "This isn't just civil court anymore. This is criminal conspiracy." We divided into teams. Rita and Deshaun would handle the legal assault, file an amended motion adding fraud and forgery charges, request an expedited hearing claiming irreparable harm since foreclosure was imminent, subpoena Cascade Retreats bank records to show the profit pattern, and copy the state attorney general on everything to trigger a criminal inquiry. Deshaun was practically vibrating with excitement, probably already writing the law review article in his head. Jessie, my engineer daughter, would handle the technical breakdown. She'd already reviewed Brenda's nephew's infrastructure report and found calculation errors that overstated repair costs by 300%. The firm wasn't even licensed in Washington, only Oregon. Jessie drafted a competing report using actual engineering standards, not made-up numbers designed to justify theft. "I'm going to enjoy shredding this in court," she said, and I'd never been prouder. The media angle went to Aisha from Cascade Weekly. She'd been digging parallel to us and had interviews lined up with 5 affected families. Human interest, Carmen's kids, Old Ed's heritage tree, my late wife's garden, photos of the forged charter documents side by side. She wanted to publish 3 days before the court hearing to create public pressure on both the judge and the district attorney. Maximum impact. Then there was the trap, Sheriff Roy's idea, and it was beautiful in its simplicity. If Brenda's breaking into properties to manufacture violations, that's criminal trespass at minimum. Burglary if she damages or takes anything. That moves this out of civil court into my jurisdiction. He looked at me. "You said she stalks social media?" I nodded. "She knew about Liam's birthday because I posted about it. So post that you're going out of town. Make it public. If she takes the bait and enters without permission, we respond." He paused. "I've got a tactical team that needs training scenarios. They could be in the area conducting exercises." The room went quiet as everyone processed what he was suggesting. Glenn started grinning. The financial prong was Jesse's other stroke of genius. Every HOA carries errors and omissions insurance to cover board member mistakes, but insurance doesn't cover intentional criminal acts. If we proved Brenda's fraud, the insurance company would deny coverage and potentially sue her personally to recoup any settlements they'd already paid. "Insurance companies hate fraud," Jesse explained. "It triggers mandatory audits. I'll draft a letter to their carrier summarizing the allegations. They'll open an investigation independent of anything we do." Let me give you some knowledge here because this could save your house someday. First, expedited hearings exist when waiting would cause serious irreparable harm, like losing your property to foreclosure. You file a motion explaining the emergency, and the judge can bump you up the schedule. Second, subpoenas aren't just for trials. During discovery in civil cases, you can subpoena bank records, emails, anything relevant. The bank has to comply, can't hide. Third, errors and omissions insurance protects organizations from honest mistakes but not crimes. Prove the board member committed fraud, and suddenly they're personally liable for everything. Insurance drops them like a hot rock and goes after them to recover money. That's when people start talking, start making deals, start rolling on each other. We worked until midnight, every detail mapped. Rita would file motions Monday, Aisha would publish Wednesday, court hearing Thursday. And somewhere in between, if Brenda took the bait, Roy would be waiting. "She's going to escalate," Rita warned as everyone gathered their papers. "She'll know we're coming for her. Expect the worst." I thought about Sarah's garden, about Carmen's kids, about 11 families who'd lost everything. Let her escalate. I'm ready. Glenn clapped me on the shoulder. "Still think you should have gone with the skunk scent idea?" Even Roy cracked a smile at that. Brenda saw my Facebook post about taking Liam to his soccer tournament in Portland, entire weekend, 3 days. I made it public, tagged the hotel, even posted a photo of my truck packed with camping gear. Pure bait. But she didn't bite immediately, and that's when things got interesting. First, she learned about the newspaper investigation. Small towns are like that. Someone always talks. Derek's source at the county clerk's office probably warned them when Aisha's document requests started piling up. Brenda panicked. Brenda called an emergency HOA meeting for that Tuesday, sent notices to everyone with urgent financial clarification in the subject line. I didn't go, but Carmen did, recording everything on her phone. Brenda stood at the podium in the community center, hands shaking slightly, trying to project control she didn't have. Recent questions about HOA accounting are based on misunderstandings. The $40,000 discrepancy some members have mentioned was a software error, already corrected with our accountant. She didn't provide corrected returns because there weren't any. The money was just gone, spent on her lifestyle while Derek's construction company circled the drain. We've engaged legal counsel to address defamatory allegations being spread by certain members. Anyone continuing to make false public statements will be held accountable. But the real damage control happened behind the scenes. She private messaged the 3 scared retiree board members, people who'd voted yes on everything because they were terrified of conflict. Told them Nate was planning to sue the board personally, that they'd lose their homes if they didn't present a united front. It was pure manipulation, but it worked. Within 24 hours, the HOA's lawyer Vince sent me a cease and desist threatening a $50,000 defamation suit if I continued making false public statements about HOA finances. I didn't respond, didn't post anything, didn't argue, didn't take the bait. Let her think the threat worked. But behind the scenes, Deshawn filed an ethics complaint against Vince with the Washington State Bar. Lawyers can't threaten meritless lawsuits to silence whistleblowers. It's called abuse of process. Meanwhile, Jesse had already contacted the HOA's insurance carrier with a detailed summary of the fraud allegations. An adjuster opened a file within 48 hours. The insurance company's investigation would run parallel to ours, and they had subpoena power we didn't. Then came the sabotage attempt. Night before my supposed Portland trip, someone cut my internet line at the property edge. Clean cut, diagonal, professional. My cameras inside still recorded to SD cards. I'd built in redundancy specifically for this, but they didn't know that. Glenn was secretly sleeping in his RV, about 200 yards into the timber on my property, keeping watch. Around 2 a.m., he heard a diesel engine, saw Derek's truck creeping up the access road with no headlights. Glenn called Roy immediately. A deputy responded, not Krantz, thankfully, and found Derek walking around with bolt cutters near my back fence. Fresh cut in the wire, clean as surgery. Derek claimed he was checking on a friend's property. Couldn't explain the bolt cutters or why he was there at 2 a.m. The deputy wrote it up as suspicious activity, filed it under an ongoing investigation number Roy had already opened. One more piece of evidence in a growing pile. The next morning, Roy called me. They're spooked. Cutting internet, prowling at night. They're escalating. You sure you want to go through with the trap? I thought about that forged charter, about Carmen's kids, about Derek's bolt cutters in the dark. If Brenda breaks in, it proves the pattern. We need it on video, Roy. He was quiet for a moment. Okay. I'll have units staged nearby, and I might call our tactical team for a training exercise in the area. They need the practice. Meanwhile, Brenda was burning through goodwill faster than Derek's company burned through cash. She served Carmen with a foreclosure notice for the protest non-payment. Pure retaliation. Old Ed's cabin got red-tagged by a county inspector, Derek's poker buddy, claiming imminent structural failure. The cabin was fine. Ed had owned it for 43 years, and it had survived earthquakes that knocked down newer construction. 3 more families caved under the pressure, paid their assessments just to make it stop. But the families who stayed, we were getting angrier and more organized, and Brenda still didn't understand what was coming. She thought we were annoying gnats she could swat away with lawyers and threats and middle-of-the-night intimidation. She didn't realize we'd stopped being victims the moment we started documenting everything. She'd built her little empire on fear and lies, and we were about to kick the supports out from under it. I texted Glenn. I'm posting the trip departure now. Let's see if she bites. He sent back a thumbs up and a photo of his RV, curtains drawn invisible in the timber. Ready when she is. The morning of my Portland trip, I posted a photo of my truck at a gas station with the caption, "Headed out for Liam's big tournament. Go Wildcats." Tagged the location, timestamp, everything. Made it look like I'd be gone for 72 hours minimum. Then I drove to Glenn's place in town, parked my truck in his garage, and waited. Glenn, bless him, couldn't resist having a little fun with it. That afternoon, he went to the diner in town for lunch, the place where everyone sees everyone, the gossip nexus of the entire county. Derek showed up 20 minutes later, not coincidentally. Slid into the booth across from Glenn without asking. Glenn, right? Nate's buddy? Derek's smile was grease on glass. Heard he's out of town for a few days. Glenn kept eating his burger. Yep. Soccer tournament. Derek drummed his fingers on the table. Thing is, I feel bad about how things have gone. All this HOA tension. I was thinking maybe we could work something out, put this behind us. You're a reasonable guy. He pulled out an envelope, set it on the table, didn't open it. $5,000, cash. For you to maybe forget about that night you saw me at Nate's place, with the cameras and all. Glenn looked at the envelope, then at Derek. $5,000? Man, that's insulting. He pulled out his phone, set it on the table face up, recording indicator visible. How about 20? I'm not a cheap date. Derek's face went through several interesting colors. Confusion, realization, panic. You're recording this? Glenn smiled. Washington's a 2-party consent state for recordings in private conversations, but we're in a public diner. This is totally legal. Derek grabbed the envelope and bolted, left his coffee, nearly knocked over a waitress. Glenn forwarded the audio to Roy within 5 minutes. Attempted witness tampering, another felony for the pile. That afternoon, Brenda texted her board members. Emergency inspection today. Safety concern reported by neighbor regarding harm in property. Will document all violations to justify foreclosure action. The neighbor was Derek, who didn't live in Pinecrest. Deputy Krantz agreed to accompany her, apparently not realizing his brother-in-law was walking into a setup. 2:47 p.m., cameras picked up Brenda's Lexus turning onto my access road. Deputy Krantz's patrol car right behind. Glenn texted me from his RV. Showtime. I was sitting in his living room 3 miles away, watching the camera feeds on his laptop, every angle covering every approach. 2:51 p.m., Brenda tried the front door. Locked. She pulled bolt cutters from her trunk, the same ones her nephew had used probably. 2:52, she cut through my lock. The sound on the camera audio was crisp, clear, undeniable. Bolt cutters shearing hardened steel. Krantz stood behind her, looking uncomfortable, but not stopping her. She said, loud enough for the camera, Section 12.4 covers this. Krantz, if you say so. 2:54, they entered. Brenda immediately started photographing everything with her phone. Opened drawers in my kitchen, moved furniture, went through papers on my desk. This wasn't an inspection. This was a search. Krantz kept saying maybe we should go, but Brenda ignored him, cataloging violations that didn't exist. Glenn texted Roy. She's inside. Felony burglary in progress. Roy had positioned his SWAT team 4 miles away, running a training exercise that happened to be in the area. Pure coincidence. 3:03 p.m., 3 black Suburbans and an armored Bearcat rolled up my driveway. Tactical team deploying with precision that would have been beautiful if it wasn't happening at my cabin. Inside, Brenda heard the engines, looked out my window, and her face went through the same color journey Derek's had. Confusion, realization, pure terror. Krantz said, "What the hell? Roy didn't tell me about any exercise." Brenda's voice on camera shrill, "We're police! I'm HOA president! This is legal!" The loudspeaker from outside. Occupants of the residence, exit with hands visible. This is sheriff's office. Krantz realized he'd been set up. "Brenda, did you actually get a warrant?" She waved her clipboard like it was a magic talisman. "We don't need a warrant. Section 12.4. He cut her off. "That's not how laws work. We need to leave now." But Brenda refused. She actually refused to leave, thinking she could bluff her way through. SWAT breached the door, already damaged from her bolt cutters, and 4 operators flooded in, weapons drawn following protocol because a deputy was involved and they didn't know if it was a hostage situation. Brenda and Krantz both got ordered to the ground, cuffed, Brenda screaming the entire time. "I'm the victim here. The owner is a criminal. Check my Facebook posts." She actually said that, on camera, while handcuffed for burglary in someone else's cabin. Roy walked in 30 seconds later, reviewed the camera footage on site, and arrested Brenda for burglary, criminal trespass, and destruction of property. Separated Krantz for questioning about aiding and abetting. Then he called me. "Nate, you can come home now. Your cabin's secure. And you might want to call that reporter." 72 hours after Brenda's arrest, the emergency HOA meeting was standing room only. 90 residents packed into the community center that usually saw 12 people on a good day. Cascade Weekly had published that morning, front page above the fold, with the headline, "HOA President Arrested in Break-In, Fraud Allegations Surface," and a photo of Brenda in handcuffs. 2 Seattle TV news affiliates had camera crews in the parking lot interviewing people as they arrived. Brenda posted bail, $10,000. Derek had to mortgage their primary residence in Bellevue to cover it. She sat at the front table looking like she'd aged 5 years in 3 days. No tennis visor today. Hair pulled back, minimal makeup, hands shaking as she shuffled papers. The smell of burnt coffee from the ancient community center urn mixed with nervous sweat from 90 people who'd finally shown up to watch the reckoning. She read a prepared statement her lawyer Vince had written. "Recent misunderstandings have been weaponized by a small group of disgruntled owners. I acted within my authority as president at all times. The arrest was a misunderstanding. Charges will be dropped once the facts are reviewed." Her voice cracked twice. Someone in the back shouted, "What about the forged documents?" She looked up, deer in headlights. "I don't know what you're referring to." I stood up. Rita nodded at me, handed me a stack of packets she'd prepared. I started passing them out. Every single person got one. Side-by-side copies of the original 1998 charter and Brenda's 2019 altered version. The whiteout visible in the photocopy, paragraph 3.7 missing like a pulled tooth. The room went silent except for pages rustling. "This isn't about me," I said, staying calm. "It's about 11 families who lost their cabins in the past 5 years because someone changed the rules. My grandfather built my place with his hands. My wife planted flowers there before cancer took her. Brenda tried to steal that. Not for community standards. For profit. I projected the next image on the screen Glenn had helped me set up. The LLC registration showing Derek as managing member of Cascade Retreats Holdings. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Carmen stood up, her voice shaking but steady. She called CPS on my kids because they left bikes on our lawn. Do you know what that does to a 7-year-old? Having strangers come inspect your house, ask if your mommy hurts you because someone lied? Carmen's voice broke, but she kept going. My kids were terrified they were going to be taken away because of bikes. Old Ed stood next, showed a photo on his phone of his 200-year-old oak. That tree survived since before Washington was a state. She told me utility company needed access. Total lie. It's a stump now. He projected the photo on screen. The massive stump, growth rings visible, surrounded by sawdust. People in the audience started crying. Glenn played the audio of Derek's bribery attempt on the sound system. Derek's voice, $5,000 cash, forget what you saw. Then Glenn's response, how about 20? I'm not a cheap date. Nervous laughter broke the tension for a moment, but the implications settled heavy. Jesse stood up, engineer to the end. I reviewed the infrastructure assessment. The calculations overstate required repairs by 300%. The firm isn't licensed in Washington. This wasn't an inspection. It was fiction designed to justify theft. She distributed her competing analysis, 20 pages of actual engineering showing the cabins were structurally sound. Then Sheriff Roy stood at the back of the room. He didn't say anything, just stood there in uniform, arms crossed. The symbolic weight of law enforcement watching. Next to him, a woman in a blazer introduced herself. I'm Investigator Chen from the Washington State Attorney General's office. We've opened a criminal inquiry into HOA financial practices and document fraud. If you've been affected by actions taken by this board, please see me after the meeting. She held up business cards. 20 people lined up immediately. Aisha from Cascade Weekly asked the question everyone wanted answered. Ms. Kowalski, did you alter HOA covenants to justify liens against properties your husband's company later purchased below market value? Brenda opened her mouth, closed it, looked at Vince, her lawyer. He stood up. I'm withdrawing as counsel effective immediately. He was protecting his law license, getting off the sinking ship before it took him down. Brenda broke, right there in front of 90 witnesses and 2 TV cameras. You don't understand the pressure, the expenses. Derek's business was failing. We were going to lose everything. I was just trying to save us. It was a confession. On camera. The TV crews were getting every word. Someone called for a vote. Remove Brenda as president, unanimous. Void all liens, place 2019 to present pending legal review, unanimous. Hire independent auditor, unanimous. Rescind all special assessments, unanimous. Applause broke out like thunder. Brenda gathered her papers, walked through the silent crowd toward the exit. As she passed my chair, I said quietly, "You could have just followed the rules." She didn't look at me, just kept walking, out to the parking lot, to the camera flashes, to whatever came next. The community center erupted in conversation, people hugging, crying, angry, but mostly relieved. The nightmare was over. 3 months later, the legal dominoes had all fallen in satisfying succession. Brenda pleaded guilty to felony burglary and misdemeanor fraud, altered documents, selective enforcement, the works. Sentence: 18 months suspended, 5 years probation, $47,000 in restitution to affected families, 200 hours community service. Derek caught conspiracy and bribery charges, pleaded guilty, paid an $80,000 fine. Their Bellevue house went on the market within a week. Cascade Retreats Holdings got dissolved by court order. The 11 properties they'd acquired got auctioned, proceeds going to reimburse the original owners or into a community fund. Carmen and I led a coalition that bought 2 of the cabins at fair market price, converted them to affordable rentals for young families who wanted mountain access but couldn't afford the inflated vacation home market. Deputy Krantz took early retirement after an internal investigation, pension reduced, facing a civil lawsuit from the county. The class action suit against Brenda, Derek, and the HOA's insurance carrier settled for $340,000. Covered everyone's legal fees, property damages, emotional distress. The insurance company dropped the HOA's coverage entirely after paying out. Turns out insurers really do hate fraud. The new board spent 6 months finding a carrier willing to take them, and the premiums tripled. Expensive lesson in oversight. New leadership got elected in a special meeting. Carmen became president, promised transparency and actual rule following. Old Ed took treasurer, started publishing monthly financial reports anyone could access. Jesse volunteered as compliance officer, reviewing any citations before they got filed to make sure they were legitimate. First official act, public apology to the families Brenda had displaced, plus a fund to help them return if they wanted. 3 families came back, their cabins, their creek, their memories. For me, the personal healing happened slower but deeper. I taught Liam how to use his great-grandfather's hand plane, the same one my grandpa taught me on. We built a small bench for Sarah's wildflower garden, which had exploded that summer, lupine and paintbrush and columbine creating a riot of color that made hummingbirds drunk with options. Sitting there on that bench, watching Liam catch the mechanics of following wood grain, I felt Sarah smiling, not from memory this time, from the place itself, the land that held 3 generations of our lives. I donated $15,000, my share of the settlement, to establish the Pinecrest Heritage Fund. Purpose: grants for low-income families to preserve historic cabins, pre-1970 structures that were part of the area's logging history. First grant went to Old Ed, covered his foundation repairs. Second went to a young couple whose great-grandparents had homesteaded in the 1940s but who couldn't afford the maintenance on the original structure. We started an annual Pinecrest Heritage Days festival, tours of historic cabins, woodworking demonstrations, storytelling from old-timers. Scholarship fund for local kids pursuing trades instead of college. Sarah would have loved it. Glenn created a website called HOA Self-Defense Toolkit. Free PDFs showing how to request tax returns using Form 4506A, how to search state business registries for conflicts of interest, template letters for challenging illegal liens, state-by-state guide to HOA laws, 12,000 downloads in the first year. Local news featured it. People from across the country emailed thanking him for giving them weapons against their own petty tyrants. At the Heritage Festival that first summer, Carmen mentioned her cousin in Idaho fighting an HOA over solar panels. They're calling it an eyesore, even though state law protects renewable energy installations. I caught Glenn's eye across the crowd. He was grinning. I looked at Carmen. Tell her to call Rita. We've got experience now. The festival wrapped as the sun dropped behind the ridgeline, turning the sky orange and purple like a bruise healing. Liam ran past chasing fireflies with Carmen's kids. Jesse sat on Sarah's bench talking to Old Ed about timber frame engineering. Glenn manned the barbecue, arguing with someone about the proper temperature for brisket. Sheriff Roy showed up off duty, brought his grandson, let the kid try fishing in the creek. This is what Brenda never understood. Communities aren't investments. They're not numbers on a spreadsheet or properties to flip. They're people and history and the accumulation of small kindnesses over decades. You can't buy that. You sure as hell can't steal it. I stood on my cabin porch watching the festival wind down, smelling wood smoke and Douglas fir and the particular scent of summer in the mountains. My phone buzzed. Text from Rita. County just flagged another HOA president for financial irregularities. Interested? I smiled. Texted back, always. The fight for home never ends, but neither do we. If you've got an HOA nightmare story, drop it in the comments. You're not alone. And if this helped you understand your rights, hit subscribe. We're just getting started.
That's a wrap for today's episode on HOA Stories. If you enjoyed watching Karma in action, smash that like button, comment your thoughts, and let us know if you've dealt with HOA madness too. Subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA meltdown we post.